Hello, brave traveler. I'm Jan, and welcome once again to another evening of dark stories and adventures. Tonight, we embark on a journey through the Witcher's world, a place where bedtime stories are not filled with lullabies, but with the sharp fangs, claws, and curses. In this world, legends rise, not to comfort the young, but to test the fearless, where heroes tread beside sorceresses and beasts all bound by magic, as ancient as the stars themselves. But tonight, our focus falls on one monster in particular, a lesson, an ancient spirit born from the very essence of the wild. Some say it is a guardian, others claim it is a demon. All agree on one thing: it is not a creature you wish to meet beneath the moon's pale gaze. So wrap yourself in your coziest blanket, pour a cup of something warm, perhaps spiked with a drop of mandrake, or a splash of mulled wine, and dim the lights. But beware, where warmth and comfort gather, shadows slink closer, drawn to the glow. They wait just beyond the firelight, silent as breath held too long, ready to pounce when you least expect. Now, let the journey take you away. Our tale unfolds in Velen, a place where the air itself seems to carry the weight of whispering warnings. The land is thick with shadows, and secrets weave through the wind, stirring the ancient trees. In the village of Aikenvale, the people gather close to their hearths, the flicker of firelight dancing across their anxious faces. They cast nervous glances toward the dark woods beyond, a stretch of land that seems to breathe with its own pulse. In recent weeks, something sinister has stirred. It began slowly, like a shadow growing longer as the sun sets. At first, it was just the animals, found with their bones snapped in ways that defied nature, bodies discarded like broken toys in the fields. The sight alone was enough to send a chill through the hearts of the villagers, but it didn't stop there. Soon, people began to disappear. At first, it was the hunters, those who ventured too far into the woods. Then it was the farmers, the children, taken in the dead of night, with no trace except the occasional torn garment or a chilling scream carried on the wind. Those few who were found, if they could still be called people, were left in such a state that no words could fully capture the horror. Their bodies torn open, twisted, as though some dark force had claimed them not for hunger, but for something darker. Every night, the villagers heard the same eerie sound, a slow, deliberate scraping, antlers against bark, moving in rhythm with the trees. It was a warning, a message that grew louder with each passing night. But no matter how they tried to silence it, the darkness crept closer. The villagers left offerings at the edge of the woods, bowls of milk, bread, and honey, gifts for the spirits of the forest they hoped to appease. They whispered old prayers and chants, but nothing worked. The attacks grew worse, the dread deeper. The people of Aiken Vale had seen enough to know when the forest was no longer a place of life. Something had awoken, something ancient, dangerous, and filled with rage. A lesson, a forest guardian, twisted by fury and hatred. A creature of old magic, now corrupted, no longer protecting, but hunting. And so, the villagers whispered a name they spoke only when hope had faded. They sent for a witcher. He came at dusk, Geralt of Rivia. The sky hung low with clouds, and a soft drizzle misted the air, clinging to the roofs of Aiken Vale. The village was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As Geralt rode in, the few villagers who had dared to wait outside huddled together, their faces drawn tight with worry. His black cloak, soaked from the rain, clung to his armor, every step of his horse thudding softly on the muddy ground. His silver sword, strapped to his back, caught the dim light, shimmering faintly. Those golden eyes, cold, sharp, inhuman. They scanned the crowd, landing on each person briefly, as if stripping away layers of pretense, reading their fears. And in those eyes, the villagers saw nothing familiar, only the chill of something beyond human. A shiver passed through them. None could hold his gaze for long. As Geralt dismounted, the village elder approached, her hands trembling as she clutched them before her, trying to find her words. Her voice cracked as she spoke of the horrors, the animals found with their bones snapped, the children who had vanished, the bodies torn open. Her voice trembled as she described the strange sounds, the scraping of antlers against trees, the wolves with glowing eyes that haunted their dreams. Geralt listened in silence, his face unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed that he was calculating, piecing together the fragments of their tale. His gaze shifted toward the forest, its dark expanse looming like a shadow at the edge of the village. The trees stood tall, silent sentinels, but Geralt could sense the life within them, the restless energy, the wrongness that clung to the air. At last, he spoke, his voice low and rough, barely more than a murmur. This isn't just a guardian protecting its territory. A pause. The wind picked up, carrying a distant howl from the forest. It's on a hunt. His words fell heavy in the space between them, like the closing of a crypt. The villagers exchanged nervous glances, fear settling deeper into their bones. The elder's eyes widened, her worst fears realized. Geralt adjusted the sword at his back, pulling the hood of his cloak over his head. He didn't wait for further questions. There was no need for more words. Monsters didn't wait. And so, without a glance back, Geralt set off toward the forest, the thud of his foot's fading as he disappeared into the mist, leaving the villagers to stand in silence, staring after the long figure who had just walked into the mouth of darkness. The forest was an ancient thing, older than the village itself, older than the stories whispered about it. The trees stood tall and unyielding, their gnarled branches twisting toward the sky like skeletal arms. The ground beneath Geralt's feet was soft, damp from the rain, each step sinking slightly into the earth. Fog curled around his boots, clinging to him like ghostly fingers as he moved deeper into the woods. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that made even the bravest men nervous. No birds sang, no animals rustled in the underbrush, only the distant drip of rain from the leaves above. Geralt's senses were sharp, attuned to the slightest shift in the environment. He had been in places like this before, places where the land itself felt alive, as if the trees were watching, waiting for something to happen. At the base of a towering oak, he stopped, his eyes narrowed as he examined the bark. Claw marks, deep, jagged gouges, far too large and too precise for any natural predator. These weren't the marks of a creature hunting for food. No, this was something else entirely. A gust of wind stirred the leaves, cold and biting, rattling the branches above like the teeth of the dead. Geralt's hand moved instinctively toward the hilt of his sword. He could feel it now. Something was watching him, not from any one place, but from everywhere at once. From the shadows between the trees, from the earth beneath his feet, from the very air around him. Another sound, soft but distinct, a rustle in the bushes to his left, a twig snapping. Geralt's reflexes were honed to perfection. He turned, drawing his sword in one fluid motion, the silver blade gleaming under the muted light, and from the shadows they emerged. A pack of wolves, but these were no ordinary wolves. Their eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, fixed on him with a focus that was also human. They moved in unison, too precise, too deliberate, as if something greater controlled their every motion. Geralt tightened his grip on the sword. He wasn't afraid of the wolves. He had faced countless beasts, creatures of every kind, but this was different. The lesion was close, and the wolves were merely its puppets. The wolves circled, their low growls vibrating through the air. Geralt's muscles tensed, every sense alert, every movement calculated. One wrong step, and they would be on him in an instant. But he didn't fear them. He feared what was behind them. He could feel the lesion's presence, lurking just beyond the edge of sight. The ground trembled beneath him. Vines thick and twisted shot up from the earth, latching onto his legs like iron chains. They pulled with unnatural strength, dragging him toward the ground. But Geralt was ready, His sword flashed, slicing through the vines with precision, and as he freed himself, he unleashed Ard, a shock wave of telekinetic force that blasted the wolves back into the underbrush. It gave him a moment to breathe, but only a moment. The air around him felt heavy, thick with tension, as if the very forest was alive with rage. And then, from the shadows, it appeared. The Leshen, a towering figure cloaked in moss and bark, its antlers gleaming black as night. Its hollow eyes glowed from deep within a skull-like face, a twisted semblance of a deer, yet far more monstrous. The ground quivered beneath its steps, as if the earth itself trembled in its presence. The fight began in silence. Vines lashed out once more, snaking toward Geralt, but he dodged, rolling to the side and slashing through them with his sword. The wolves, recovering from the shock of Ard, lunged again. Geralt moved swiftly, his blade flashing as he deflected their attacks. Cutting them down one by one. But no matter how many wolves fell, more seemed to take their place, their eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. And the Leshen stood at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed on the Witcher. It didn't need to move. The forest fought for it. Every vine, every wolf, every tree was its weapon. Geralt's hand flicked, and a burst of igni, a stream of fire, erupted from his fingers, scorching the Leshen's bark-covered body. The creature staggered, but it did not fall. The fire burned its outer shell, but beneath the bark there was something older, something that flames alone could not destroy. The fight was a deadly dance, every movement precise, every action critical. Geralt knew he couldn't outlast the Leshen in a drawn-out battle. The longer the fight went on, the more the forest would aid its twisted guardian. He needed to end it quickly. He waited, watching the way the Leshen swayed, its movements slow, almost rhythmic. He could hear the forest itself breathe with the creature's steps, each sound a beat in the deadly rhythm. And then, just as the Leshen lunged forward, Geralt struck. His silver sword plunged into the creature's chest, sliding through bark and bone with a sickening crunch. The Leshen let out a scream, a sound like the splitting of trees, the tearing of roots, and the howling of winds through dead branches. The forest trembled, the trees themselves seeming to sway in mourning. For a moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. The Leshen's hollow eyes locked with Geralt's, as if in some final silent curse. The glow in its gaze flickered, then dimmed, and the towering creature began to collapse. The ground trembled beneath its weight, vines curling back into the earth, retreating into the soil, as if the forest itself was releasing its grip. Geralt stepped back, watching as the Leshen's foam crumbled, bark and bone turning to ash in the soft rain. The eerie light in the wolf's eyes faded, and without a sound, they slunk away into the shadows of the forest, no longer bound to their master's will. The stillness that followed was profound. No growls, no rustling leaves, only the soft patter of rain. It was over. Geralt wiped the sweat from his brow, his breath heavy but controlled. The fight had been fierce, but he had faced worse. As the lesson disintegrated into nothingness, he sheathed his silver sword, the metal sliding into the scabbard with a soft hiss. The forest, once alive with malevolent energy, now felt almost peaceful. The darkness was still there, but it was no longer watching him. When Geralt emerged from the forest, the drizzle had subsided, leaving the village of Aikenvale draped in mist. The villagers had gathered near the edge of the woods, their faces pale and filled with uncertainty. As they saw him approaching, the elder stepped forward, her frail hands clutched tightly together, hope glimmering in her eyes. "It's done," Geralt said, his voice as rough as the wind that swept through the village. The elder let out a long, shuddering breath. Some of the villagers murmured prayers of thanks, while others simply stared at the Witcher in awe. They had feared the lesson for so long that it seemed almost impossible to believe that their nightmare was over. But as the rain began to lift, the oppressive weight that had hung over the village seemed to lighten, if only a little. "What of the children?" one of the men asked, his voice trembling with fear. Geralt paused. He had found no trace of them in the forest. Whatever happened to them was something the villagers would have to reconcile with on their own. The lesson was defeated, but not all its horrors could be undone. "They are gone," he said, his tone blunt, but not unkind. The elder's face crumbled. She nodded slowly, as if she had already known, but needed to hear it spoken aloud. The villagers bowed their heads, some weeping quietly. Geralt said nothing more. His job was done. He didn't linger on the emotions of the living. They were not his to carry. He turned, his cloak swirling behind him, and mounted his horse. Without another word, he rode out of the village, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. The path away from Aikenvale was quiet, save for the rhythmic clop of Roach's hooves. Geralt's thoughts drifted, not to the battle, but to the faces of the villagers. He had saved them from the immediate threat, but the scars the lesson had left on their lives would linger long after its defeat. That was the way of things. His hands tightened on the reins as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of damp earth and moss. The forest behind him lay still, a sleeping giant no longer under the thrall of a monstrous creature. Yet Geralt knew that something else would eventually come to fill the void. It always did. Monsters and men, they shared that hunger of power, control, dominance. Geralt was used to it by now. He had been fighting monsters long enough to know that for every evil he vanquished, another would rise in its place. His work was never truly done. As the mist thickened on the road ahead, Geralt's gaze turned toward the horizon, where a faint glimmer of light cut through the dark sky. Another village, another hunt, another cursed creature waiting in the shadows. And so the white wolf rode on, ever into the unknown, a silent sentinel against the darkness that crept in from all corners of the world. In this world, peace is only ever borrowed, never earned. And so, my dear traveler, I hope you liked this story of Geralt of Rivia, and sweet dreams to you. Good night.